Hi there, so we're moving on now to Act 2. At the end of Act 1 we had, as discussed, a sense of duplicity. Basically we have Lady Macbeth and Macbeth internally, they've both been talking about planning and plotting to commit regicide and kill Duncan, where on the surface they're welcoming him into their home and appearing to be loyal subjects. So Act 2, the opening scene is essentially the start of Macbeth moving towards committing regicide. He's in the dead of night and he happens to actually stumble upon Banquo, who meets him. Banquo gives him a diamond, which is actually a gift from Duncan, and it's basically a gift for having such an enjoyable evening because they've served them food and they've treated them very well. Macbeth, after leaving Banquo and moving towards the act of murder, begins to hallucinate and has visions, and he sees in front of him a bloody dagger, or a dagger he sees before him, and this hallucination is kind of foreshadowing what he's about to commit and the act he's about to commit. Now that immediately tells us that his mental state has deteriorated even before having committed the act of regicide. He's so overwhelmed with the guilt he knows he will feel that he's having visions and hallucinations even before the act itself. Now, Macbeth kills Duncan, but it happens off stage. The next part that we get is that he returns back to his wife, but he brings back with him the bloodied daggers that he has killed Duncan with. Now, Lady Macbeth is not happy about this because he's essentially bringing the crime scene evidence back to her. So firstly, she chastises him and says, "Why are you doing this? Stop being so stupid," basically. She takes the daggers from him, goes back to the room where Duncan has been killed, and she places the daggers into the guards' hands because they're trying to frame the guards. Lady Macbeth purposely managed to get them really, really drunk by drinking lots of wine, and they passed out, which meant Macbeth could commit the act of regicide, but now they're framing the guards and making it look like they've committed the act. We eventually get to the next morning, and Macbeth and Macduff are about to go and wake up Duncan. They both remark about the fact that it's been so long and it seems to be that they're not actually awake yet, and they're kind of wondering why Duncan hasn't actually got up. Macduff goes in to check on Duncan, and Macduff is the person who finds Duncan dead. He raises the alarm and they all start to frantically search for maybe what might have happened to the murderers. Now, in this kind of chaos, Macbeth kills the two guards who they were wanting to frame for the murder of Duncan. And he uses the excuse that he did so in fury because of loyalty to Duncan. But as an audience, we know he did that because he needed to silence the two men that he was going to frame for this murder. What happens is, at this moment, we have a bit of chaos and a bit of anarchy, and Malcolm and Donalbain, who are the two sons of Duncan, they fear for their own lives because obviously their father's been killed, there's an act of treachery, so they decide to flee. Okay, Malcolm flees to England and Donalbain flees to Ireland. Now, what happens at the end of this act is we have a little kind of speech by Ross, one of the lords, about how things seem very unnatural. He had heard strange noises in the night, and he'd heard people talk about the fact that the horses had become wild and even started to commit cannibalism and eat each other. This is basically a suggestion that the nature or the natural order of things has been turned on its head because of what's happened overnight. The rightful king has been killed by, a usurper, which is Macbeth. And at the very, very end, Macbeth is crowned king, but Macduff does not attend the coronation because immediately he has suspicions about what Macbeth was doing. The two key quotes from this whole act, and again there's so many good quotes you could pick, but for me personally I picked the two, is from scene 1. Again, quite a famous quote. Macbeth says, "Is this a dagger I see before me?" An easy quotation to remember, but lots of good layers, links to key themes like violence, treachery, guilt, paranoia, the supernatural, and it ties in with the idea of him immediately having a deterioration of a mental state because he knows he's about to commit regicide. And then the second one is, I would say, from scene 2. It's a remark that's made by Lady Macbeth, where she quite confidently says to Macbeth, "A little water clears us of this deed." So she's basically saying, we can wash our hands of this and forget about it, and the guilt won't catch up with us. Now, just as I'd said in the first video, when we eventually get to Act 5, Scene 1, it's a very different story. Lady Macbeth actually, during sleepwalking, is frantically trying to wash her hands and hallucinating the blood on her hands and the stain of the guilt that's plaguing her mental state. So those two quotes are really important. They help set up this idea that both of these characters, although they seem firm in their purpose just now, they, underneath this kind of firm exterior, there's a fragility that's going to be eventually deteriorated and broken down as the play progresses. And hopefully that's helped for Act 2. We'll move on to Act 3 in our next video. Thanks.